listening to Inclusive AF with Jackye Clayton and Katee Van Horn.
Welcome. This is Katee Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.
And this is the Inclusive AF podcast. Dun, da, da, da.
Yeah.
Today. Is that a good Monday song for you? That's not all I can do.
That really sounded like a Wednesday, but whatever.
It was very royal. Like I was rolling out the carpet for for the princess to come, Princess Jackye. All right, Jackye. So how's your Monday going?
Well, it's going well because I saw a video, not sure if you saw it. It was a princess party. A little girl, 3 years old, had a princess party. And at the party, a guest came. It was a dragon. And all of a sudden, the princesses go, ah! And they have swords and shields, and they start chasing and beating this dragon. And I was like, this is the best.
Best thing ever.
They loved their princesses, but still could attack and bite the beast. And it was just the cutest video I saw all weekend. And so I really appreciated it.
Well, and I like that it's also that they don't need the white knight.
That's right.
They're going to just handle it themselves. So yeah.
Turns out.
I fully support that message.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a friend of ours on today. So I'm going to turn it over, Peter, to you to have you introduce yourself and share a little about who you are, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you, Katee. I am a retired law professor and a former economics professor, and I worked also at the Federal Trade Commission in the Division of Consumer Protection as a staff economist. I guess the most unusual thing about me is that I was a freshman at Princeton at the age of 14, and I graduated in 3 years at 17. So then I started grad school at 17, and it took me a little bit longer. As my mother, who got a PhD in biophysics, would say to me often, she got a PhD in 3 years and had 2 kids. What's my problem? I said, I can't give birth.
Wow.
I like your mom already. I like her already.
She's 93 and a professor at New York University Medical School in the Department of Biochemistry. And she's not teaching anymore, but she's still doing research. And she says, I think I'll retire at 95. And I haven't told her I retired yet completely. So she's going to call me a slacker.
She is.
That's awesome. I love it. Yes. I mean, it does, just from that very quick intro, it does seem like you're a slacker. So I appreciate your mom's thoughts on that. Yeah. What are you talking about? So tell me, so you are, thinking about mathematics, economics, that type of thing. Where does your interest then in DEI come from? Like, how did you start to think about that?
Yeah, so my partner is the reason I started thinking about that. Actually, when George Floyd was murdered, we were watching a lot of these protests on television, and she said to me, why don't you write something about this? Instead of using your mind to talk about securities regulation and insider trading, why don't you write something useful?
I like your partner too.
Yes. My partner's
in your life.
Yeah, she's a Hispanic OBGYN who said to me once, your mother would like me better if I was a Chinese neurosurgeon or heart surgeon who played the piano and the violin, right? I said, yes, but why do you want to date my mother?
That is funny.
Right.
That's a great question.
Awesome.
So I thought about it a lot, and I said to her, well, other people have worked on this question of discrimination, prejudice, stereotyping. And I said there are a lot of efforts to have people be more inclusive and to encourage diversity and equity. Although she said, yeah, I know what you're talking about, because she goes like, at her job at Temple, she said, they make us watch these videos. And I said, yes, they make us watch similar videos at Colorado. And I said, I'm not sure anyone who's a seething raging racist is going to be convinced by these. And I think most people who watch these go, yeah, this makes sense. I think, we should have a diversity of opinions because people have different backgrounds, different mindsets. So a team of people who are different are more likely to solve problems than a team of people who are identical. And I said, economists have also thought about, I said, lawyers have thought about this in terms of hate crimes, whether that will discourage racism. I said, it's unclear because sometimes someone might want the honor, quote unquote, of committing a hate crime, right? Because they might brag about it. So I said, it's not good. The direction of causality is correct. And I said, the other thing is, it's not always obvious whether something was a hate crime. So when the person in Atlanta killed the hairdressers, right? Some people thought, I think the sheriff said he had a bad day. But some people thought it was a hate crime. In fact, it was reported that way in Korea. But in the US, it was not, the focus was not that most of the victims were Asian. It just was like, it was a coincidence that happened. And I said, economists have also looked at this issue, although in a way that's kind of interesting because there are different models of discrimination. Like one due to Gary Becker, who's a Nobel Prize winner, is that firms discriminate not because firms have discriminatory intent, but their customers have prejudice. So they want to satisfy their customers' preferences or their employees' preferences. And they're not willing to do something until someone else does. So like the first Black person in baseball or football was a big thing, but once that happened, the floodgates opened. And I said, the other sort of dominant model of prejudice is due to lack of information. So the idea is employers don't know the productivity of a particular person, but they've hired people with different characteristics that are observable, but unalterable. So the idea is if I hire a lot of orange people and they turn out to be very productive, but purple people tend to argue, then I might develop some beliefs about orange versus purple people. Now, the problem with this is if I think that people who are teal are not productive, I may never hire them or offer a very low wage for them. So therefore, I will get no disconfirming evidence. My beliefs will just stay wrong forever because there's nothing to test them. And this often leads to like occupational segregation. Like, most of the people who I talk to as an orthopedic surgeon, because I might need a knee replacement, they're men and they're very macho and very competitive. And I asked someone who was a hand doctor why this is. She goes, it was a field that very few women went into until Title IX and women's sports happened. But before that, it was just a male field. And she goes, also, hip replacements and knee replacements were not as common as they are now and as quick to do. So I said, I have a prejudice, which is I would like women doctors, women dentists, because I think they're more careful and more, they take more care, they're more empathetic than my experience with male doctors and dentists. And I said, it's interesting because any given individual has different attributes. You can think of them as a point in a high dimensional space. Like I'm American-born Chinese, I weigh a certain weight, so forth. And I said, any race or ethnicity has a distribution of people, right? And for every Mother Teresa, there's a Hitler. For every Gandhi, there's a Stalin. So to think that I can infer something about you as complicated as your productivity just from the race that you have, which is the amount of melatonin in your skin, that's kind of amazing to have that belief. And it doesn't make sense if you think about it from a mathematical, statistical way, right? And it also sort of insults or devalues people because it doesn't treat people as individuals. It treats people as sort of avatars or averages of the race they have or the gender they have, right? So, but I thought about it some more and I said to her, I think the real problem is racism is about wrong beliefs. So someone who's a purple person might think orange people are not good at math. So I'm not going to hire an orange person to do math. that belief can be wrong, but it's never going to be corrected because they never hire someone. And the other thing is, people have incentives to hold beliefs besides their accuracy. So this is not news to people, but it was news to economists and lawyers, because we tend to think about information as something that helps us make better decisions. So you should always want more information unless the cost is too high. But for real people, information is not just to help them make decisions. Information has an affective value, positive or negative. So, for example, my partner mentioned that people often take a test and they have to pay for this test for the BRCA, I think, one gene for breast cancer, or people take an AIDS test, but then they don't go back to find out the result, because as long as they don't know, they can believe they don't have the disease. Once they find out, they can't believe that anymore. And the third dimension of information acquisition is identity. So if the information threatens who you think you are, or if the information contradicts the beliefs of your spouse or friends or coworkers, you may not want to see that information, because then you'll be ostracized. So it's interesting how people put different weights on these three things: decision making, how much it helps your decision making information, then the positive or negative emotion of your information, and then the identity aspect of information. And if you put a huge weight on identity and affect, it might trump the information to realize that race, ethnicity, gender are not really helpful in figuring out someone's productivity. You have to know that person as an individual. So I ended up writing a couple of articles about that, and then I thought about it, and someone said, yeah, but who reads law review articles? Just law students and law professors. Why don't you write a book for a more general audience that someone in the airport can pick up and read? I said, okay, is that my target audience? People running between flights, are delayed. So yeah, so I thought about it, and I thought about the title Disrupting Racism, because I thought, we may not be able to cure or end racism. I remember Kamala Harris said, racism is a virus, which is true, but I don't know how you can inoculate someone from racism. Although I think most kids are not racist. They'll play with anyone who will play with them. They have to learn to be racist. And who do they learn that from? From their parents or from other adults. And so really we want to help people unlearn this false belief. And that's what my book is about.
I don't know about you, but I don't know very many people that are hopeful about the world of work. And I'd like to change that. My name's Marcus Mossberger, and I started the Hope at Work podcast, where you'll find two things. Number one, really interesting guests. And number two, innovative ideas about the future of work. Check it out.
Awesome. Very cool. So when you think about kind of so Jackye and I are both data people, and in HR, that means nothing compared to what you know from an economic perspective. Let's be very clear, like numbers and math. But we are very much data-driven folks, both of us. And so for the HR person that's listening to this, what is your take, from the viewpoint that you have, kind of the math viewpoint, the economics, law, all of these things, about some of the changes that are going on right now, where DEI is being taken out of, university programs and out of, obviously just a lot going on from a political standpoint. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's unfortunate and sad, because I think if we teach people to basically respect other humans, regardless of their race or gender or sexual orientation, that's actually a better way to prepare people for work, right? Because you often work in teams, not alone. And in teams, you want people who have different experiences, different mindsets, different ways of seeing things. Because if you're all identical clones, you're not going to have solutions that come out of this give and take of differences. And I don't want to date myself, but I will. So I think in the original Star Trek, the idea is that you want diversity in infinite dimensions. I'm getting the quote wrong, but the idea, and someone's actually proved this mathematically, that most problems are better solved by people who have diverse backgrounds, viewpoints, histories than people who have the same, right? Because if they're people who are the same, you just need one of them. You don't need the team. The point of the team is to have people communicate information, experiences that others have not had. I mean, to me, I used to teach business associations. And when I talk about corporate boards, I always say it's amazing that corporate boards are old white men, because half the population is women. And soon the population will have more people who are non-white than white. And I said, it's not clear to me the old white men will know what things women want to buy or people of color want to buy, right? So I said, it's in the interest of a company to maximize profits to have this diversity. But I think things are slow to change, and I think people think of it as a zero-sum thing. If we have women and minorities, that's fewer Caucasian men.
Well, and I think, we talk about it all the time within DEI, where it's like, sharing these things, or we're actually talking about, doesn't necessarily mean it's taking away from you. In fact, it's adding more to you.
Right.
And it was funny. I will get there. I'll talk about the circle and you'll understand, and we'll get there. So I am a Newcastle United fan in the Premier League in football / soccer, as we call it in the United States. So last week, I was in Las Vegas with my sister. I'm Black, she's Black. And the game was at 9:30, and it said, I was like, she was like, where do we have to go? I mean, it's Vegas. I was like, the sports are everywhere, but we're going to this pub on Tropicana Boulevard. It's the Crown and something. It's a British pub, open 24 hours. And I'm going to eat bangers mash, and I'm going to have a Newcastle at 9:30 in the morning. She said, okay. So we go in, right? And everyone's staring at us because there's these two absolutely gorgeous Black women standing in front of the bar, and they're like, and I have the Newcastle jersey on. So they're like, what is happening, right? So we sit in our little corner, and by the end of it, I had already taught my sister all the chants and all the things. By the end of it, we're hugging each other. We're best friends. Call me when you go back to Vegas. We sat for another hour. And then this past week, we were watching them play, and they put our picture on the TV. Wow. And she was like, that's so weird. I was like, yeah, but it just shows, we can extend and expand if given the opportunity. Once you have the opportunity to say, oh, you like soccer? I like soccer. Right. You like beer? I like beer. We can look at some of those things, and it's interesting how people perceive that was very different than the look we got when we walked into the place. And giving yourself to these opportunities, I think, is what's hard. It's getting over the fear and trying to, have some kind of plan in mind, but the understanding you might not know everything.
Right.
Like you think you know.
Right. So you have to have some humility. And again, I'm going to quote Yoda: fear leads to hate, hate leads to anger, anger leads to, I forget what, but it's something like tragedy or bad things happening. Right. So part of the thing is that people may fear other races or groups because they didn't interact with them. Then it's very easy for politicians to play in that fear and say, those people are responsible for your having economic misfortune. I think that's what Hitler did with the Jews. And then so it's easy, if you find someone else as a scapegoat, it's not my fault, right? What was the, I think in Roger Rabbit, I forget the woman's character, but she's not bad. She's just drawn that way.
Jessica Rabbit.
Jessica
Rabbit. Yes, thank you, thank you. Yesterday, my partner told me this. She went to Siena College to visit our nephew, and she said he originally was Saturday, but he said, I have something to do Saturday. Can we make it Sunday? She goes, sure. And if you want to bring a friend, that's fine. So he bought 5 friends, 5 tall, white, friends of his, some from class, some from the dorm, just friends. And she's Hispanic, and our nephew is her sister's son. Her sister married someone who's Black, so he's an Afro hair. And they went to a Chinese restaurant, and the waitress looked at her hair and said, wow, that's so unusual. Can I touch your hair? And my partner said, okay, we know you like his hair. Like if some man said to you, I want to touch your hair, you would be probably freaked out. So let's move on from the hair thing to ordering sushi now. And I said, I said, I saw a video, a half an hour program, I think, of Stanford women's volleyball team, and they played in China. And in China, they were like, these are tall, white, blonde women. They were like everywhere. It was like a big deal. And then she went on her way driving back, she went into a Wawa. I don't know if okay. So it's like a 7-Eleven. So she went in and everyone was white. The customers, so she thought, okay. And they looked at her strange, probably the same way they looked at you when you went in there. So she got what she wanted, and she got in line where 3 white men before her, and something in the back of the register, like some machine, made some strange noise. So she looked at it, but then she helped the 3 men. Then it came to my partner's turn, and she went to fix that. And my partner thought, what is that about? Why couldn't you fix it earlier?
Right.
Why couldn't you wait? I'm done. And when she came back, she was very curt with my partner. So my partner thought, instead of escalating and being curt with her, I'm going to try to charm her. And she did. And it's sort of like, and then the person realized, even though she's Hispanic, she likes the same foods, or, she watches the same TV programs, so she's not so bad. And I said, that was very clever of you. And I said, also very, you have to have a certain amount of patience and a certain amount of goodwill that you assume other people have, so that can work. If you then harden yourself to them, it's just going to escalate. And I said, the really weird thing about some of the hatred that people have is that we're living on this planet, which of course, Carl Sagan, I can't do his voice, would say it's a tiny blue dot in space. And it's like a life raft. So if you don't like someone, it doesn't make sense to drill a hole on the other side of the life raft, because you're all going to sink. And that's what's happening, I think, with the global warming, which I think is a nice euphemism for a climate catastrophe that we're having now. And if we don't solve it because of the nonlinearities and tipping points, I don't know. I mean, just this morning, my partner and I were talking about whether humanity will survive. She says, with AI, it's like the Terminator. We could develop AI that wants to kill us. We could have viruses that we introduce for bio-warfare. I said, we could have many things to kill us. I said, we're very good at destroying things. The question is whether we have the maturity to not use those things, to realize those things are actually very destructive, not just of the people we hate, but of ourselves. I said, I don't know if people will recognize this lesson, but I said, I think that's why it's important to teach children. As Whitney Houston says, children are our future. And I always say they can't be our past and they can't be our present. So they have to be our future. It's a tautology. Okay. But it's really true that, you want to teach children, or you want to have children, you don't want to teach them racism, because I don't think they're born racist. They might, like, I remember when my partner would take her niece and nephews to go to see movies, they might see someone who's like on crutches, and they would stare at this person and my partner would say, well, what happened is the person fell or something happened, so it's temporary. And then one of them fell and they were on crutches, right? So, I mean, I think if you teach kids about diversity, equity, inclusion, and actually have them do it, then maybe in the future, there's hope for humanity. There's a historian of science named Thomas Kuhn, and he's written a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he said, sometimes you can't convince old people to adopt new ideas. You just have to wait for the old people to die and the young people to grow up with the new ideas. And I think that may be true, right? In some sense, I think people who are younger today are more understanding of the fact that it's important to have tolerance. It's important to have humility, that other people with different experiences doesn't mean they're worse or better. They're just different. And their different experiences may be valuable to you and helpful to you. I always say, like, if you play a game with someone who is, you're afraid of them, and they help you win, then you change your mind. It's not to play to compete, but play with this, And I said, if we could sit all these people down and play some video games, maybe that'll help. I said, it's just amazing how people have this hatred, and it's based on a belief that's wrong, but they won't correct it. They won't update it. So I said, there is hope, but there's also reason to think we may not survive, right? If we,
Well, it makes me think of when you think about how people have access to now that we
yes,
didn't have access. Like if I wanted to learn, it was the people that were in my proximity, whether it's at my school or where I worship or where I buy clothes. Like so you only stay in those small communities. But then you go online, especially, the way that it's like some AI is for good, where it's exposing you to things that you've never seen before.
right.
How to make candy. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. I mean, and when I was a kid, I was delusional in thinking as I was watching the Olympics. I love the Olympics. And I
Mhm.
remember thinking, what if I was supposed to be the world's greatest figure skater? But my parents never took me skating. So I didn't know how I was going to reach that. How would I know? And I would ask my parents truly, and they would be like, well, you would have to believe that God would put you in a situation where eventually you would have. And I was like, well, when I have kids, I'm going to expose them to as many things as possible so that they can make different decisions based on real experience instead of, what they have to look up at the library or whatever. And now I think that they're pretty inquisitive. And a lot of us, especially younger, now you don't know what's going to pop up, right? Like you
Yeah,
don't know what ad or what food or what location. And it's interesting how they have access where things look more normal, where other generations it didn't look normal because all you could do was look left and white. That's what I said. I meant right, left and right. So you could see like what's around you. And having that exposure helps normalize things. And there's
yeah,
so many things now that you would never think of like 30 years ago. Like that doesn't
yeah.
even make any sense. That why would people do that? I mean, my kids always will ask me when they were watching old movies, like that's such a problematic. They're like, this is, what kind of culture is this? And it's like,
Right.
this was the United States
This is
2 years
America.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Welcome
Well,
to
I'm
the
American.
90s. It was the 90s.
The 90s were wild. What was happening?
But
And a lot of the 80s.
well, I love what you're saying, Jackye, and it just is so like the whole conversation about exposure to things that folks maybe have not been exposed to, but also the, as you said, Peter, the next generation being our future. I'm sure you all saw the announcement that Mitt Romney made about retiring, and that, oh, we should all be retiring and letting the younger generation,
Yeah.
come in. And it was like, I was like, yes, because these older white men, like back to your comment on the boards, like, do they know what the customer of 2023, 2024 and on want? Do they understand like some of the nuances? I always love when like Zuckerberg or, any type of technical person is, on the Senate floor being questioned about whatever, and they're asking these questions and you're like, oh, Nelly, like you
We're
don't
in trouble.
know. Yeah,
Right,
you don't.
right.
Yeah. You should not be on the Twitters.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I went to a Federal Reserve, one of the local banks. They each specialize in different things. So the Philadelphia one, because it's close to Delaware, I think, does credit cards and consumer credit. And so I was sitting next to the only Black person in the room. And I said to him, oh, like during a break, so where do you teach? Or he goes, I'm in the Library of Congress. I said, what are you doing here? He goes, there's a bunch of us in the Library of Congress who go learn stuff. He goes, I was trained as an economist, so that if any congressman or senator wants, they can call us to teach them about something. Because he goes, they just want a popularity contest. That's all they did. They may know nothing about AI or inflation or unemployment. So instead of them being embarrassed, they asked us to give them a quick crash course. I said, that's great. He goes, the only problem is they have to ask. If they don't ask, we can't teach them. I said, that's not great. I said they should like be mandatory or something so that they get exposed to different subjects in different areas. And I really think it is the case that people have a chance with this little thing that they have in their pockets to be exposed to different things. You mentioned YouTube. I was talking to my primary care physician, and she said, you should learn how to cook. I said, I took some cooking classes, but I'm not sure like the adult education at the high school near me. She goes, YouTube. She goes, you can learn to do anything on YouTube. I said, I don't know if it'd be correct, right? But it's true, like people now know about dim sum, for example, which is Dianxing in Mandarin, because it just spread, right? And I think there is a potential with browsers or computers for people to access other lifestyles instead of watching cat videos. Hopefully that'll be the case.
But it's very true. But I love the story you're telling about the gentleman that works at the Library of Congress, because we have seen, I think, way too many examples recently of folks that clearly have not reached out to those folks to get any additional information. So good that they should be doing that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I would love to hear your thoughts just from a economics perspective. Obviously we have a lot going on with the economy right now, and would love to hear your take on community banks and on some of these things that are being pitched as ways to become more diverse or to support more diverse companies, groups, etc. What are your thoughts on some of these different diversity, I won't call them initiatives, but kind of the community driven ideas?
Finding a great career has always been a challenge. But today, with the massive changes underway in just about every sector of the economy, in just about every country in the world, finding a great new career is even more challenging. And if you're a student, recent graduate, or someone else early in their career, it's even harder for you because you just don't have the experience that those who might be 10, 20, 30 years older than you have. The answer? The podcast, From Dorms to Desks, a podcast by College Recruiter job search site, where every week we take a deep dive into a topic specifically of interest to candidates who are early in their careers and looking for a great part-time, seasonal, internship, or other entry-level job.
So help me understand, how does a community bank work and how is it going to improve diversity, equity, inclusion?
So like using a Black owned bank, or using, that's one of the things that has been pushed to kind of help the economies of neighborhoods that maybe have not had funding before, or to get more leverage for them to, small business loans, things along those lines that are focused on folks from marginalized communities. Like, what are your thoughts? And I probably did not ask that correctly, and I apologize. But what are your thoughts on some of those activities?
I think that's a great thing, because I think that, there is research showing that children pick up a lot of their financial habits from their parents. So if your parents are disorganized or don't pay the bills sometimes, you go, oh, that's the way things are done. If, like, for example, my parents would only buy things with cash. They would only buy a car with cash, a house with cash. And I, there's things called credits, and she goes, no, we don't want to owe people things. Whereas I think other people, max out their credit card and live from paycheck to paycheck. And I think banks are things that I remember as a kid going to a bank. They used to give out toasters and other sort of things for opening an account. And I also remember the idea of a Christmas club account, I think, or Christmas. So the idea is they take your money. There's very little interest, but they basically keep it away from you until Christmas. So it's a mechanism or device to impose self-control on you when you don't have self-control yourself. And I think having banks cater to particular demographic. I think there's one bank in New York City, it's all women. Right. And the idea then is that you don't feel so out of place, like you're the only one there. I was talking to my students and I said, it's not enough just to have one Black person on the corporate board, because that's the token Black. You need at least two so they can talk to each other and interact. And I think banking is something that really is important, access to credit and also access to the stock market. So there are studies in countries where people don't trust other people, they don't really invest in stocks. And most people do not get rich by putting money in a savings account. You get wealthy by investing in stocks. And it's not that you should, my mother said to me at 93, she goes, once I retire, I'm going to study the stock market and understand which ones to pick. I said, I'll tell you right now, if you study the stock market, if you believe in efficient capital markets, there's nothing to be gained by, unless you have inside information, which is illegal. And if you believe in the behavioral economics, which is that people make mistakes, they would say the same things. It's not clear that you can figure out what mistakes people make. Both sides say you should just buy a ETF, electronically traded fund, that follows the S&P 500. So as long as America is doing well, it'll do well. If America is doing not well, I think your stocks are not the only problem you have. As Seinfeld said, if you have blood in your shirt, maybe dry cleaning is not the most important thing that you should be thinking about. Right? And I tell my mother this and my aunt this, she's 92, and they thought, and then they saw this VU, which I told them to invest in. They go, it's going up. I said, because the American economy is going up. But I said, also, you have to be able to tolerate volatility. And I said to someone, I said, I like my temperature like my stocks. High mean, low variance. So the idea is, right? But I think a lot of people are inexperienced with these things. Like they don't understand if you want to make money, you have to take risk. Right. So a lot of things that economists take for granted. I think it's really important to teach people, speaking of YouTube, personal finance. I have a former student, Terry O'Dean, who's made up who's created these videos, about how his parents didn't get credit cards until the 60s. And they, like my parents, bought everything, without credit. And how, I don't know if it's still the case, that when you go to the bookstore, they would have a bag, and in the bag there are all these credit card offers. And I think the danger with that is younger people may not understand these are not gifts. I have to pay this money back, and if it's at a high interest rate, the cup of coffee at Starbucks, which is $4, will end up being $25. Or if I get an overdraft charge, for something, then it's, so I think there's a lot of ways, as Elizabeth Warren says, that there are these tricks and traps that banks do. So it's important to have people be familiar with banks, but also realize, like someone joked, a credit score is not really a great thing because it's a debt score. And one economist, Michael Spence, who shared the Nobel Prize with two other economists about information economics, he said one way to develop credit is to borrow money from a bank at, say, 12% and put the money back in the bank at 5%. So you lose 7%. But when you pay it back on time, and you have to take out of your pocket. Because people without a credit history, they consider risky, right? So women for a long time, if their husband died, they would have no credit. And the other thing I think that's dangerous is when, like in a couple, the division of labor is the man deals with finances. Everyone should learn about finance. Everyone should learn about, credit and stocks, because A, it's interesting, but B, it's part of your survival. And I said this to my partner. I said, we teach trigonometry in high school. I don't know how often I've used trigonometry. I think it's never. But I think if we teach how to make vegan dim sum, that would actually be helpful to me now. Right. I don't eat nutritiously. Yeah. So
I feel like that's so important. I was watching, I don't know if either one of you watched Succession, that was on HBO Cinemax, but it makes me think about equity so much, because here you have a company, a family, and it's loosely based on the Murdoch family, right? And there's a scene where their cousin, his name is Greg, goes, now that you have all this money, what are you going to do? And then he says to his coworker person, have you ever been to California Pizza Kitchen? And the guy was like, no, I haven't. He was like, oh, it's the best. And he was like, no, it's not. He was like, you haven't been there. He was like, no. And I'm not going to California Pizza Kitchen, and you shouldn't either. And it made you think, like, there's all these lines of stuff that is passed on generationally. If you come from a family of wealth, they know what fine dining is. This other person didn't. So to him, all he could think about was California Pizza Kitchen. And so you get to this point where we are now, where it's like, yes, we want to be inclusive. We want to have these inclusive environments. We want more people in leadership positions. You still have to remember whether they went to college or not, the majority, it's segmented in what they actually learn as far as the real world. I mean, this year, I had a hysterectomy. I didn't know anything about it. And it's like, all women are going to go through this decision at some point. There's no place for any of us to go. And if you weren't in a family that was sharing, you know absolutely nothing. And that's where equity comes in. Like, if you're the head of this organization, there's also rules that people don't talk about that you weren't privy to if you weren't invited into the room. And so many people talk about seats at the table, but you really want to get in the room and mingle and network for a really long time to make sure that you didn't pick up the wrong chair, because you could be stuck in the wrong chair for a really long time.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely crucial. It's not just inclusion, but it's sort of knowledge of the social norms or of the sort of hidden things that may not be on YouTube, but may be on YouTube also. So my niece Anna, who's just turned 12, she said to me, "Uncle Peter, free food is good." I said, "Not always." And then she went with her dad to a French restaurant. She goes, "Oh, it was very fancy. And I think I like French food now." I said, "Because of the fanciness?" Right. And so I think you're right. I mean, people who are wealthy, they just pick up these things and take them for granted. My partner said this, that, she went to Hunter College High School, and she said all of her classmates were wealthy. And when she went to their apartments, she was just amazed at how they lived. And I said, I went to Horace Mann, which is a prep school in Riverdale, at least from 7th to 9th grade. And it was the same way. I said, intergenerational transfer of wealth happens. Intergenerational transfer of trauma also happens. But I said, we really need to sort of figure out ways to provide equitable access to educational opportunities. And, most lawyers predicted the affirmative action decisions by the Supreme Court. And I said, we can't use race-based affirmative action, but we can still use other kinds like socioeconomics, adversity. But I said, the real thing I think about this is during COVID, we used Zoom. Even though Zoom can be finicky, it worked. And some students actually emailed me and said, "Professor, I'm glad that we have Zoom because I can chat with you without the whole class hearing this and thinking I'm clueless." And also, I think, and some people have written about this, white men tend to just blurt out whatever's in their minds because that's okay. Women and minorities tend to think, well, I don't want to say something stupid. I don't want to say something that's not thoughtful. So they take longer to think about something. And also, you could put them in those what are they called? The rooms, breakout rooms, right? So they could, talk amongst themselves. And yet, when a year later, when COVID had not ended, it's still not over, but I think people are tired of it. They like my partner, she's an OB/GYN. She went to her doctor, and she goes, everyone there was not wearing a mask except her. And the receptionist seemed annoyed that she was wearing a mask. You're showing us how good you are and how we're not. And I said, it's interesting how there's so many things that are useful to learn, and they may not be learned because they're not obvious. But I said, Zoom really showed us we can reach a lot more people. There was a professor at Berkeley who wrote this op-ed in the New York Times saying we should clone Stanford. Why do we have a Stanford in Italy? Why not have a Stanford in Houston, Stanford in Dallas, Stanford in New Orleans, Stanford in Miami, right? Because Stanford says they want to educate and democratize education. Well, if you have a 2% acceptance rate, that's really not quite the way you do it.
No.
And I said, Harvard, these schools that are very selective, if the reason they're selective is just to be valuable, quote unquote, or to be statusy, that's not a good reason. And in some sense, I also say calculus at Harvard is the same as calculus at a community college. I mean, calculus is calculus, wherever you learn it. But if you have classmates who have different backgrounds than you learn something from them, right? And but it is weird that the justification for diversity in the jurisprudence for affirmative action was that basically we want our white kids to be exposed to the Black kids' experience. That's a very strange justification for affirmative action. But I really think, we could clone schools. We could have Zoom so that everyone who's qualified to go to Stanford or Harvard can go. But I don't know that'll happen because that'll take away the elite status or selectivity. But I said a lot of stuff, like Jackye was saying, you can learn on the web. Like I was saying to my niece Anagan, I said, there's a lot of stuff you can learn from for free, like about data. She really likes playing video games. I said, instead of just playing them, why don't you learn how to be a video game designer or make video games? I said, I think everyone at Stanford used to take Econ 101. But this year, I think the most popular class was how to design your own app, because everyone wants to do that and be, and speaking of popularity, I think at Harvard, the class was Ec 10, most popular, just principles of economics. But then it became positive psychology, which I think shows that a lot of people there were not happy and they didn't know how to be happy. One of my nieces, another one, said to me, Uncle Peter, can you play with me? I said, I have to finish writing this. She goes, what are you writing? I said, I'm writing an article on happiness. And she goes, on happiness? I said, yeah. She goes, shouldn't everyone study happiness? I said, they should, but it doesn't happen. And I said, we think money or status will make us happy, but that doesn't. Or if it does, it's very short term. I said, relationships, having meaning and purpose in your life, these are the things that make you truly happy. And I said, a lot of people don't seem to, their life, the way they run their lives doesn't seem to reflect that. And I said, also, if we taught people that, maybe we'd have more peace and more, less consumerism, less pursuit of materialism. And then she goes, but can you get me a Malibu Barbie for Christmas?
That was a sure, uncle, but also.
Yeah, cool.
So would love, we are at time. And so unfortunately, we have to wrap up, but would love for you to share. So first off, your book is Disrupting Racism, and we'll put a link in the show notes so folks can go out and buy it. But would love, what are one or two things that you would like for our listeners to hear from this episode?
Well, I think the main thing is to not think racism has to be that way, right? That racism can be disrupted. Part of it is through being more inclusive. The idea is that if you work and play with other people who are different than you and realize they can help you, then maybe your racism will be toned down a bit. Another one is to have positive conversations with people, right? There's a professor, Alison Brooks at Harvard Business School, who's writing a book about how to talk gooder, because she says most people don't know how to talk. They don't know how to listen either. They just, spew information. But that's not always the purpose of conversation. Sometimes the purpose of conversation is just to be empathetic. And my partner says this to me too, which I think is a common male-female thing. She goes, I'm telling you this problem not because I want you to solve it. I said, then why are you telling me this problem? She goes, so that you can empathize with me. And I said, there's a scene in the movie White Men Can't Jump where I forget, Rosie Perez's character says, I'm thirsty. And Woody Harrelson says, I'll get you some water. And she goes, I can get my own water. I don't need you to get me water. I want you to say, I too have known thirst. Yeah. And I think we can do things as individuals and as a society to disrupt racism. From a society point of view, one is to have organizational and social norms, organizational cultures, which are more positive and supportive of people with different backgrounds, right? If you teach, like when I took history, we never talked much about the history of anybody except white people and up to like World War II. Right. And if you look at the history, Asians, Blacks, Native, all the different groups actually helped America become what it is today. And so I think it's really kind of interesting that we've gotten to where we are, where we're a very polarized society. And it's just, not a great way to run a democracy. And I think, as Barack Obama said, the American dream has not been fulfilled. It's an experiment that we haven't, quite lived up to the promise. And I think it's important to say to our young people, you can make this a better country. And one way to do it is to sort of be inclusive, be humble, be empathetic, and be mindful. So I'll just end with one last story. My cousin, he was acting up. So my partner said, David, you need to get a timeout. He goes, no, I know what I need. I learned this in school. I need to go hesitate. We said, what? It was meditate. But he captured the idea of meditation, which is to stop, to hesitate, to stop and think, is this what I want to do? Right? Does this make sense for me and for society and for that other person? I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. Jackye, what you got?
Just stay curious.
Yes.
You've had worn a lot of different hats and kind of crept into a lot of different places just to be curious and bring that information. And once you learn something new, share it with as many people as you can.
Yeah, I said this at a conference recently, that if someone said, what do you want people to take away? I said, if you can know something at the end of the day that you didn't know at the beginning of the day, that's a great day.
Yeah.
And I said, there's nothing wrong with admitting you don't know something. You want to learn something, because then you benefit from this. And I said, saying you know everything is A, impossible. B, it's sort of arrogant, right? You want to be humble and you want to be curious, and you want to think of learning as a lifelong process. It doesn't end. It doesn't have to end. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to say two things. The Library of Congress thing, that they actually have folks that can provide information to our political leaders. That's a good bit of information for all of us to be aware of. That's something that we can tell them to go do.
Yes.
But I think the other piece for me is also just that whole idea of, from the money perspective and the psychology around money and how we think about it. And, you made the point of, you're not going to make money by putting your money in a savings account. You're going to make money by looking at the S&P 500. You're going to, look at some of these other things. But folks aren't taught that. And so it is also the go use YouTube, whether it's to make dim sum or it's to learn more about how to actually get stocks and whatnot and kind of get your portfolio put together. So thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it. And we will have this out for folks soon. So thank you so much for joining us. This is Katee Van Horn.
And this is Jackye Clayton.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.